Thanks, everybody. Happy to be here. I'm going to stand this side. And for the keen observer, you'll see that I've color matched with my slide deck, and also like the broader. No? Okay. So we're going to talk about funding DAOs with super PACs, and I can believe that some people don't know what super PACs are, especially if you're not American. I will explain it, but let's jump in. I'm from Mukherjee Landau, I'm from Butter, and what do? We've been looking at DAO finance and governance. We've got a few different things in the space. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because this is supposed to be a lightning talk, so we'll go fairly quickly. So what do we want to do? First of all, we want to fund DAOs. DAOs basically deliver public goods. We're going to keep things really simple, so I'm going to run through this stuff. But the idea here is we want to fund public goods. Who currently builds public goods? Governments. If we're going to think about how we fund public goods, we really want to know that we want to make sure that we can avoid any failure modes. And so the best place to look is looking at governments and nation states and seeing where they failed. And if you look at the state of play, we can learn a ton from looking at governments. And you can't see anything there, but that's a map of the world. If you look at nations, you can see that many of them fail for one overwhelming reason, which is that at some point in time, one group is able to run the entire show and extract all profits from everyone else in the whole nation. And that basically means that elites are able to run unchecked and able to basically take everything they want. And this has two real downsides or two real impacts. Number one, if you're someone who's not one of the elites, every single thing you do, any profit you make will be taken from you, right? So what does that mean? You stop innovating, you stop pushing yourself. And also, if you're one of the elites, you just stop all kinds of innovation. This is why people try to stop the printing press and things like that. So nations fail typically when the elites are able to create extractive political institutions and then follow them up with extractive economic institutions. That sucks. We don't want that. So what do we have in crypto? This is Compound's governance leaderboard. This is the top 6 companies. There's Polychain, Bain, A16Z, the usual cast, basically. So there's basically a small group of companies that own most of crypto. So if we're thinking about building these public good infrastructure, most of that is already pretty much captured by just a few number of companies. Is that good? Is it bad? I don't know. We have the same in Ethereum. This is from Glassnode. It shows the percent of supply held by just 1% of the addresses. First thing you notice is it ticks up over time. It stays up. It doesn't go down, and it just keeps going up. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, if we're thinking about Ethereum as a DAO and Bitcoin as a DAO, they have this problem as well, right? So they're effectively the same. Around, over 90% of all tokens are held by just 1% of the addresses. We know what this basically is, right? But there's something that's slightly different between Ethereum and Bitcoin and DAOs and governance tokens, which is that DAO governance tokens have voting rights and Ethereum BTC do not. And it's important. This is actually why nations have this really nice, they have this really nice property where if you're a citizen, your money doesn't give you voting rights. Not directly, arguably, but you actually do just have one person, one vote. And that's why most people feel like the solution to Plutarchy is actually one person, one vote. I'm not sure I completely disagree, but what we do want to have is this separation of governance rights and economic rights, because it's important to be able to target them better. Now, a lot of governance tokens are the same thing we saw in Ethereum. That's Lido. So what we can say is most of crypto and most of DAOs, most of Web3s, most of the public goods infrastructure is actually a plutocracy. And you might say, well, Vaughan, we don't care if it's a plutocracy. You probably should, right? Think about Plutarchic open source software. Open source software is non-excludable, non-rivalrous. It's a public good, right? And think about Google and its use of public goods. It has used Kubernetes, an open source containerization program, to actually compete with AWS. Right? So you can, if you're the elite and you own everything, you can say, well, I'll make this thing nice and open, free over here. Meanwhile, I destroy your business over here, right? And we've seen the same thing with, actually, people think that Google used Android to compete with iOS. They bought Android and deployed it to actually keep Microsoft out of the mobile market. So, right, Plutarchy, pretty dangerous. So imagine we could fund DAOs, right? We really want to fund these things. Imagine we could fund them, and we could do it at any scale without increasing the risk of plutocracy. So how might we do that? Now this is I'm not going to explain this whole thing, right? It's ridiculous. We can talk about it in the workshop. But this idea is fairly simple. I'm just going to give you an example. So let's say that you want to try not to get mesmerized by the coins. It's pretty cool. But imagine a contract that's a financing contract. And what you do is you say, rather than me just like buying tokens, I'm going to put my like some tokens into this contract, and this contract will then buy tokens from the DAO, right? So the DAO sells governance tokens to this contract. The contract buys the governance tokens from the DAO. And what's really nice about that is then you can issue a new token, a derivative token, to the finances of that contract. And these are the blue things over there on the left. And those represent the economic rights. They can't vote with them. And all of the governance rights stay in the contract. So then the owner of the contract effectively gets the governance rights. So what's nice about this is that you've effectively isolated both things. You've separated voting rights and economic rights. So that means you can keep raising, you can keep adding liquidity for DAOs, you can get more and more money into DAOs, and you can do it without increasing the risk of plutarchy. And what's really nice about this is that like it's super doable today. It's like you don't even need new things. These contracts already exist. So this is like, we've got like one step, and the reason I'm explaining in this way is this is kind of how we ended up here. We didn't start trying to design this, we kind of ended up here by like discovering things. And what we like ran into is like a few challenges. Like why would someone LP? Like why would someone put tokens into this? Like who would that person be? Why would they accept things like, maybe like, why would you want to do, I'm not gonna get into challenges, we can go through that later because I wanna keep moving. But the last challenge was like, maybe we can even improve upon this design. We can take it from just allowing DAOs to raise financing or us to fund public goods without increasing the risk of plutocracy, but maybe we can do it, but we can also increase inclusion and not plutocracy, and plurality. So we can bring more constituencies in, like people with different types of beliefs into DAOs, not just like the same old people having tokens delegated to them and voting. And this is where the idea of a super PAC came in. And for anyone who doesn't know what a super PAC is, really like Americans understand this and everyone else is like, what the hell are you talking about? First of all, ignore the word super, but political action committees are just groups of people who come together and put money together to then like give money to a political candidate. And a normal PAC has some limits around what they can do, and a super PAC is not limited in how much money they can spend because they don't give the money directly to the candidate, right? So there's some like, they can buy ads. And I think if you've like ever watched American TV, you've seen those weird ads and you're like, who the hell paid for that? Super PACs, that's what they're doing. So I'm gonna like run an example because it makes it easy to understand. If anybody's been watching like what's been happening with Maker and like Rune's Endgame, like what's really interesting there is like, there's Rune, and Rune is like, I think he owns like 52.6% of like all Maker, something crazy like that. And he's got this idea about where Maker should go. And then Hasu's really the only person, like another delegate has come in to kind of counter that, and he's bringing a whole new set of ideas. And so imagine like Hasu wasn't able to actually acquire, he didn't have the wealth to acquire tokens himself. He just had really good ideas, but he has no voting power. So imagine, like, again, we really want to have this like check on the power of the whales. Imagine Hasu could come in and say, well, how about I just tell you my ideas, and then you fund me, and then I use the tokens to go buy governance rights, right? So I buy Maker. Those sit in the contract. I can now vote with them, and you guys still have exposure to Maker. You still have your economic rights. You can still go out and sell those tokens and make loads of money. But now you have this they're like pre-delegated tokens effectively. Like I now have them as Hasu, I can go vote. And what's really interesting is you don't need one Hasu. You can get like multiple Hasus. You can have people competing for funding and pulling together these ideas about how DAOs should vote. You can actually get collectivization around completely new ideas. I keep thinking about like Radical Exchange, for instance, is like trying to like really push into DAOs and provide their expertise around like tokens and new ideas of like new economic models. And I think this could be like a really interesting pattern for like bringing new ideas and new thoughts and new groups of peoples and new constituencies into DAOs. And the outcome would look something like this. You start with like whales dominating all votes. Like, I don't know if anybody watched the recent sushi head chef vote, but that was swung by two voters, like just two votes, two individual votes. But there was like 300 individual voters. 2 votes decided that. And this is what I mean. Whales, even though they kind of exercise discretion, they pretty much run the DAOs, right? They decide. So here you'd have like kind of these groups that had banded together with slightly different preferences, who'd come forward and they were funded, they've acquired voting rights, and most importantly, they sit outside the DAO. They started from outside the DAO, not within the DAO. So it means you're able to bring like plurality, like loads of different ideas, loads of different voting preferences. And what's really exciting about this is today, if you're a delegate, you typically go into the DAO and you get voting rights delegated to you by people within the DAO. With this model, you start from outside the DAO and you acquire like like from people from a completely different like point of view, completely different ideologies. They come to you, they give you this voting power, and then you have representation in the DAO. And you think about this, like the market is then creating better delegates who maybe don't have power and bringing constituencies together who don't have representation in the DAO. So it's a really nice idea because number one, we're funding public goods, we're doing it without increasing plutocracy, and we're doing it while also actually increasing plurality. Better ideas, better public goods. I'm going to keep ranting. I sound like a candidate now. But there's still a bunch of challenges, right? Like why would people do this? Who would be those people? Like, is there an arbitration risk when people just, like, would whales just kind of dump their money into these things? But we think it's a really interesting space, and we're, like, looking at these things in more detail. So that's the conclusion. I'm not going to ask you to read it, but, like, super PACs offer something really interesting in DAOs, and we think they could be a great way of keeping existing governance powers in check. So, yeah, first of all, go read about super PACs. It's super weird. And if you're interested in, like, talking more about it, then we'll be on one of those tables, I think, over there. Thanks a lot.